Coach Mills here, coming at you with a
brand new Valorant video.
Holy shit, that intro was cursed. And in this video, we're gonna be breaking down 5 tips to dominate patch 2.06. We're gonna be breaking down some advanced strategies so that you can perfectly read the enemy and outplay the hell out of them. And we're gonna be talking about the new smoke meta and everything that you need in order to get the leg up on your opponents this competitive patch. But for those of you who want a little bit more, you know, you want that special service, not the fun kind of special service, but the kind that is dedicated to help you improve at Valorant extremely fast. We got so much damn content on the GameLeap website, special tailored videos that are going to help you improve just like that. So do yourself a favor, go check them out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, the first big tip that we're gonna give you in order to actually predict when the enemy is going to be rushing you or trying to make plays, and it's all about the ability cooldown timings. There are actually multiple characters in the game that have their abilities on a cooldown, and the cooldown is the exact same amount of seconds. Think Omen, Sova, and Yoru, who have a 35-second cooldown on all their abilities, Yoru just becoming part of this group as of patch 2.06. Now, the reason that this is extremely important for you to keep track of and understand is it's actually very possible for you to completely read what the enemy is going to do based on when these important time intervals come up in your games. Let's first talk about Omen, who can have 2 smokes and he has a 35-second cooldown on each one. Well, here's the thing. Right off the bat, in any given attacking round, the Omen will typically use 1 smoke to bait or block off a certain angle. This will allow someone on his team to potentially lurk up, or it will just deny information, making it harder for the enemy to rotate, and he'll use that to help his team bait out extra utility, and that's going to be really good for the engage later on. Now, when that 35-second interval comes up, that is an incredibly likely moment that Omen will get a smoke back and then use 2 smokes to block off 2 sightlines as his team rushes onto point. Now, if that Omen misses that window, uses a smoke in a really obscure area, and doesn't actually rush, then you could wait another 35 seconds before the Omen rushes again. Almost every single engagement is going to be centered around an Omen having 2 smokes, so it can be a lot easier for you to predict when the enemies are going to rush on, and if you're holding a sight and a smoke comes, that second smoke at that 35-second intervals, you can dip out of there and basically get out of the point so you don't get hit by all the utility as the enemy rush onto point, and then just play for retake. And you could also position a lot more passively as it gets close to that 35-second interval so that you're a lot better situated for your point being the point that they decide to rush. In a very similar way, Sova has a specific 35-second recon timing that you can use to either set yourself up in a position to shoot the recon right away, you're playing around his potential recon rollout, or you're positioning in a place that doesn't get you completely killed by a recon coming in at that 35-second interval, completely out of the point or towards the back of the point, so it's easy to dip out and not actually get tagged. Yours was a little bit different because there's a 35-second window for his gate crash, his teleport ability, but that means that it's actually a lot better for you to rush a potential site after he uses it and before he gets it back. So there's a window of weakness that you can capitalize, so that's just something to keep in mind. It is going to be really important for players to start to track these seconds going by, and it's going to allow you to really outbrain and outplay your enemies. Now, the next big tip that we gotta talk about is the smoke meta. And the thing is, Astra is now going to be seeing pro play, which is most likely gonna spike her pick rate as she already is seeing pretty substantial pro play in Korea. And it's looking like the character is gonna be pretty powerful, and typically ranked play will follow suit and reflect what the pro meta is doing. So I wouldn't be surprised if she sees a giant up in pick rate. Plus, Viper just got ginormous buffs, so you can definitely expect to see her. Now, with both Viper and Astra seeing a lot more play, and them being controllers that also feel Sentinel level roles, and you can have other controllers like an Omen playing with an Astra or playing with the Viper, you can expect to see just a lot more smokes in general in every single game you play, and a lot of the times you're gonna go up against or have 2 smokes or even more. Now, this is gonna really increase the value of silenced weapons because of the tracer round. Remember, you sprayed through a smoke with a silenced weapon and enemies can't easily track it. This means that if you are not using a silenced weapon, like you're using a Vandal, and you want to spray through a smoke, it is incredibly important to spray a little bit and then reposition so you don't get sprayed back and just get killed for free. On top of that, if you are someone that is using a silenced weapon, it is incredibly important for you to counter spray enemies that spray through the smokes when you can trace their rounds. And on top of that, you should be check spraying a lot of smokes. You see a smoke up in the middle section, you're holding defense for way too long. Let's say you're playing split and there's a smoke right in the middle. After a while, you should be trying to spray through the smoke from safety to potentially spray track any enemies that are trying to lurk through the smoke. And you can get information doing that often in different areas, but just be careful about wasting all your ammo, of course. Now, on top of that, you could also bait an enemy to push through the smoke by actually shooting around the smoke, just a little burst, but quickly regaining your first shot accuracy and punishing any enemies that are going to push through. But the last tip that I really need to give you about smokes is if you're pushing through a smoke, you want to attack a smoke, you want to push through a smoke, make sure that you look to the left or right before you push into that smoke, because your gun will actually poke through the smoke before your body does. And if you do it that way, you're not going to be able to see the enemy before they see where you are, and they can just spray you back. So just remember, move your gun to the side before you push through, and whip the gun forward as you push through the smoke so that you can see the enemy exactly when they see you, not they see you a slightly before. Now, the next big tip to dominate patch 2.06 is about forcing in general. It seems that Riot has severely nerfed forcing more and more. Now, with the Bucky nerfed and the Stinger nerfed pretty recent in history, a lot of times it's going to be better for you to just full save rather than trying to force again and again, because the power level is just not to the level it used to be. Sure, you can still catch off enemies if you position in a certain way, use an aggressive strategy, or catch the enemy off guard, but typically, you're not going to be able to overpower the enemies with just the sheer power of your weapons. It's going to be like you have to set up the appropriate scenarios in order to maybe clutch up a round, but it is going to be way more risky than it has been in the past. I think for those of you who want to force a lot more, you can get some value out of specifically the Marshal and the Sheriff. Marshal for defense along sightlines, just holding it down, being able to put a lot of pressure on enemies, and even getting body shot checks just to put damage onto the enemy, making it a lot harder for them to engage. And then Sheriffs, of course, just as a lurk type weapon, Sheriff might be one of the best weapons to potentially turn around, especially in the hands of duelists. So definitely keep all these things in mind about forcing in general. Now, the next thing that you really need to be doing this patch that I don't see enough of in general is just taking note of the ability-centric type compositions that you're going up against when playing against the enemy. Everyone always complains about characters like Breach and Skye, and it can be incredibly frustrating when you're playing on a point and you just get flashed out of a cubby and then killed. But the thing is, you should be playing fundamentally different against certain types of compositions. You should stop holding so aggressive on a site when you know 100% of the time you're gonna get flushed by a million flashes and loads of utility. A lot of times, if enemies play a composition where they have a lot of utility to clear sight and they constantly are rushing these sites, just dumping their abilities onto sites, it might be better for you to be playing far more passive. Let the enemy take sight. Let the enemy use their entire ability catalog, and then when you and your team get to play for retake with you alive, you're gonna be able to just outperform the enemy because they're not going to have any abilities to stop you. But a lot of times they're winning these games and these rounds not because they're playing correctly, but because they're catching you off guard because you're playing on point, just completely succumbing to the enemy, just throwing abilities against the wall. And you got to keep in mind that if that was ever done against like a pro team, for example, the individual players would just know to back off, allow the enemy to waste all that utility, and then win on the back end during retake, which is something that you should be incorporating as well. Now, the last big tip that I got for you is talking about ability baiting. While it is sometimes impossible to bait out every single ability, there are certain abilities that you should try specifically to bait out, and you bait them out by playing default and putting a certain amount of pressure on the enemy. You need to stop rushing all the damn time, which might work to a certain extent with a certain level of mechanical skill, but eventually you're going to set yourself up for failure when you go up against enemies that can punish you for never baiting out their utility appropriately. There are some abilities that are extremely powerful and can completely stop a rush. Things like Sage Wall, things like Brimstone Molly, even Omen's Paranoia, and the list goes on and on. These are abilities that you can actively put pressure on a point that these characters are holding. You can wait till they're baited out, and then you decide to rush a point. You're not baiting out every single ability, just the ones that really matter and just the ones that are the most difficult to deal with as you're rushing. And sometimes when you have to go anyways, the time is ticking down, you know you have to engage, it is important to keep these abilities in mind, for if you didn't bait them out, you can at the very least try to come up with a plan to play around them and maybe even catch the enemy off guard in the process. On top of that, you combine this with the initial tip that we talked about, which is the timing, the 35-second timing on cooldown based abilities. You could actually bait out the really problematic abilities and then engage when the enemy's abilities are on cooldown, and that's the way to really just bring it down to a gunfight v gunfight, or you and your team have abilities and guns versus a team or an enemy team that are very lacking in ability resources. Now, while talking about these concepts is extremely important so that you have tips to dominate this patch, what's even better is seeing step-by-step VOD reviews, and we have tons and tons of those on the GameLeap website made by a top 100 Radiant player. So if you want to learn from the best of the best and really learn step by step exactly what you need to do to be the difference maker and the one that can pop off and hard carry, then you gotta go check it out in the GameLeap website down below. But thank you so much for coming by. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I've only gotten 1 feat pick so far. That's just not enough. Come on, bruh. I'll see you tomorrow.